All right, now we're gonna go. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Keenan Miller, and I lead the public engagement team at our agency, and I'd like to welcome you to Metro Talks, a series of public forums to seed and exchange ideas on how the Bay Area can transform for the better. I want to acknowledge at the top of our session that we are on Ohlone land here in the Bay Area. Today, we're going to be exploring the intersections of public health, community resilience, and equitable public engagement with an expert panel. Some quick housekeeping items, basic agreements. Please be mindful that there are many voices in the room and be respectful and grateful with each other during a challenging time for all. Audience members will be able to ask questions via poll everywhere throughout the session, with questions answered in the second half. I'm going to go over how that works in a moment. And staff will also be monitoring the Facebook and YouTube comments feed if you prefer to ask your questions on those platforms. So we're going to briefly check out poll everywhere to get everyone some practice. And I'm going to add it to the stream here. So in order to interact with this, you're going to open up your web browser to pollev.com/MTCABAG302, or you can text MTCABAG302 to 22333. That's 22333 in order to join. So this is going to be live. You can answer this few warm-up icebreaker questions just to find out who's in the room with us today. As you can see, if you want to say that you're in Allegheny County, press A, Contra Costa, B, so on and so forth, or if you're outside the Bay Area. And that'll be reflected in the instant poll. So far, I've seen some heavy Bay Bridge connected counties. Why don't we try going on to the next one just to see what this looks like. So how are you accessing Metro Talks today? Computer, laptop, smartphone, regular phone call, none of the above. Like we got vast majority on computers and then 5% or so on smartphones. Again, these are anonymous, so don't feel shy about this, but we're also entering our age. If you are anywhere from brand newborn to 18, that's A. You're in your early adult years, that's B. Doesn't look like we have many seasoned folks, 55 and above yet, at least filling in on the poll EV. And since we are a transit agency, let's talk about favorite way to get around. Enter A for bike, B for bus, C for good old BART, D for car. E is a very popular choice. It's using your arms out and walking and making swooshing sounds. A lot of unconventional walkers. Okay, so finally, this is the most critical one. This is actually going to be up for the remainder of the talk, and this is the questions for panelists. So in this final page, you'll be able to both pose questions for our panelists and give thumbs up or thumbs down to questions from other audience members. Staff will be monitoring this page as well as our Facebook and YouTube comments throughout the presentation to gather your questions for the second half of our talk. And with that, I'd like to pass the mic off to MTCABAG's Executive Director, Therese McMillan, who will be monitoring today's session.
Thank you so much, Keenan, and welcome to all of you joining us for our second round of Metro Talks, recognizing the need that we need to build space to reflect and think critically about our communities that make up the 9-county Bay Area and how we respond together to these historic challenges we're seeing right now. It's a critical time to lift up equity, holding to a shared vision of a just and fair inclusion into a Bay Area where everyone can participate, prosper, and reach their full potential. And at a time when many Bay Area communities are making tough decisions on program cuts, service reductions across many sectors, hiring freezes, maintenance deferrals in the case of infrastructure. It's all the more crucial that equity is front and center, and particularly bringing the voices of those historically left out of the decision-making conversations to the table, so that we don't simply return to how things were done before shelter in place began, if we can all believe it, 138 days ago. We're really excited to continue these conversations with three experts in today's focus area, which is rebuilding a better Bay, advancing community resilience via equitable public engagement. And each will share their unique perspectives on how to more meaningfully engage communities through this crisis and why that matters so much in affecting change. So I'm going to introduce our panelists. Melissa Jones is the Executive Director of BARHI. And BARHI stands for the Bay Area Regional Health Inequities Initiative. Melissa is incredibly passionate about creating conditions to increase the quality of life and make life fairer for more people. Her work focuses on the intersection of social determinants of health, social inequity, and achieving well-being. And her experience includes work in municipal government and nonprofits in the Bay Area's large and small cities. And I will say that we will be providing more information about all of our speakers for you to have at a future point. Our second speaker is Mariana Moore, who serves as the director of the Ensuring Opportunity Campaign to End Poverty in Contra Costa, a cross-sectoral initiative that engages residents, elected officials, social sector organizations, businesses, labor, policymakers, academia, faith-centered organizations, and philanthropy. I think you've hit all of them there, Mariana, in a collective effort to eliminate poverty in our community through policy and systems change. Our third speaker is Julio Garcia, who is the Senior Program Director at Nuestra Casa in East Palo Alto. With over 25 years in community grassroots organizing, he is well tuned to the needs of the heavily immigrant community that he serves. As program director with Nuestra Casa, Mr. Garcia combines his advocacy for healthcare with the education and social service needs of families in his diverse community. And as he so aptly states, I've been working with communities for all my life. What better job than to work in the community? So a quick reminder before we jump into our conversation. Audience members, as you had a chance to work at the beginning of the session, you will be using Poll Everywhere for questions to the speakers and staff. As moderator, I am committed to maintaining a safe container for sharing thoughts and ideas, particularly as we jump into our question and answer session, part of the session. And I will be coordinating with my colleague, Kinam, who will be curating the questions, because I imagine we're going to have quite a few on this really important topic. So let's jump right in, folks. And also a note that for those of us, when we're not speaking, let's remember to mute ourselves so that the sound quality is good. So I'm going to start with a question for everyone, which is, what does it mean for the region to take an equitable approach to community engagement, especially in this new COVID-19 context that we've been living with? And so let me start with Julio. Why don't you take the first shot at this question? And you're on mute, so don't forget to unmute.
Thank you. So I think it is really important, especially in this time. So I think engaging the community and working with community members The long-term benefits of working with community members is that the community will trust you, will come to you and engage in different conversations. And as you say, in these times, it's really hard for community members. So we need to be in the community and have the pulse of the community to see their needs. So as right now, needs are, we're talking before, is probably food and rental assistance and all other needs like that. But still, it is in the realm of environmental justice, all the stuff that we're talking. So that's my short answer.
Great. Melissa, why don't you take it from there? What are some of the perspectives that you've seen and probably lived through before COVID and now with COVID? Has that changed your sense of this question?
So I think, COVID has really made clear what we've known for a long time, which is that if we have a set of relationships that are strong across the region, we're better able to respond in a crisis. And so we knew that from fire response all across the Bay Area. We knew that from different kinds of response to flooding. We've known that for all kinds of emergency and earthquake response. And in the places where there are deep relationships between the public sector and the emergency responders and the community, we're able to look out for each other much better. We know faster what people need. We're able to get information out faster through networks that people listen to and trust. And we're able to plan long-term recovery and response. And those have been incredibly important for COVID-19. And so what we've seen is that, in particular with COVID-19, there are, and we're seeing this in the national news, and we know this is true in the Bay Area, people have all different levels of belief in COVID-19 and the strategies to protect themselves. To get science-based evidence out to different communities to make sure that they're protecting themselves really requires them to hear from a trusted messenger. And so people who have had long-term relationships like Julio, like Mariana, in communities are really important right now to making sure basics get covered in terms of protection. And then really important for the long term, the interim and the long term, which is making sure we know right away what people need. So we know many, many people have lost jobs, or they've lost just hours, but lost enough hours that it's squeezing the budget for food or squeezing the budget for housing. And I think one of the things that's been really powerful for us here in the Bay Area is we had enough community organizing infrastructure and communities connected very deeply that we were able to get 100% eviction moratoriums in the first couple of months in the crisis all across the 9-county Bay Area. We're able to do that because community organizing groups were able to say fast. There's a real financial impact that's hitting hard and hitting fast for communities. It's going to threaten their ability to pay rent. We need a strategy that doesn't create massive homelessness as we try to get through the crisis. And then organizations like Mariana's was able to work with partners in their county. Other organizations worked in other counties to make sure that a county-wide eviction moratorium was passed in each of the 9-county Bay Areas. That's because we had standing infrastructure. The reason that we all know each other, Mariana and Julio, are among the reasons, I guess. There's a few reasons we know each other, but among them is that we worked together on a resilience project for the region. That was about this idea that we know we need specific resilience planning now related to sea level rise. And we need the relationships that last a long time so that whatever the resilience crisis or climate impact we're experiencing is, whether it's more fires, whether it's air quality related to fires that's making people sick, power shutoffs related to trying to reduce fire risk, that we have the strategies to support communities in the long run. And I think that there's a lot of lessons from that project I'm sure we'll talk about that were really important.
Yeah, I definitely want to return to that. So thanks. And Mariana, for you with this opening question, both Julio and Melissa have really talked about the critical need of trust and building on existing relationships, because it's so much harder to build relationships in the middle of crisis. One of the interesting things maybe to reflect on, but this has been going on a long time, longer, I think, than any of us thought. Has that perhaps just shifted the the degree of inequities that, at this time, is that a factor, or is everyone just still trying to figure it all out at this point?
Yes, that's a great question. I would agree with Melissa that relationships are absolutely key. I also think cultural humility and humility around different types of expertise is critically important always, but especially now in this crisis. And I think that equity itself is both a goal and the road to get to it, meaning that every approach and strategy and activity must be centered. It must center those who are most impacted by the lack of equities, by historic racism, structural racism, that are only exacerbating the current crisis. I also, to that point, want to say that in my view, COVID is really not creating new crises. It's just actually exposing existing 400-year-old crises around anti-Blackness and racism. And the structural human impacts of that have been terrible and heartrending and enraging, and really exposed for what were already cracks and flaws in a system designed to do exactly that. So I don't think we should dance around that. I think that in addition to centering those who are most impacted in this moment and also historically, it's really important to meet folks where they are. That's always been true, but especially true now. In this age of COVID, a lot of us have moved to Zoom or platforms like this. Not everyone has access to Zoom or has a reliable cell reception or has a cell phone. So how do we all get creative in a time where we can't get together in churches and community halls to be in deep relationship, build and sustain and nurture and be responsive in those relationships? I also think it's important to talk about mutual benefit in community engagement and not just extraction. I've talked to a lot of folks in the community that said, you're the 16th, organization that's come in to do a focus group, and please stop, because I never see the benefit from it. And I think especially right now, when, as Melissa mentioned, folks are struggling to pay their rent, to keep their families safe, to avoid ICE, there's just so much happening that they are desperate. And we must be deeply respectful of that. And it's our responsibility to figure out, in partnership with community members, how they want to engage. And the answer may be they can't engage right now because they're trying to keep their roof over their heads, right? And so how can we be of service to that? And a sort of similar thought is to really focus on community assets and not just deficits, which I think, again, a lot of institutions historically and even currently are doing way too often, right? I think in all of that, there's some really good, interesting examples of connecting dots and connecting issues and being creative. Just one example is that I'm on the Census Steering Committee in Contra Costa, and we're looking for ways to reach communities that have been designated so-called hard to count, where they have a lower response rate. It's a really critical priority right now. And the census response is very important for those communities. And so one thing that we're talking about is using county census grant funds to purchase gift cards to hand out in communities in the census tracts that are not able to respond as much as others, because again, these challenges are facing. Because again, their immediate present need is like, how do I pay my rent? And so how do we connect immediate needs, critical needs, and be of service to those needs while we also see if there's capacity and interest to talk a little bit about the census. So that's an example of the opportunities that I think a lot of folks are stepping into now with great courage and creativity in this moment.
Right, and I knew I was going to have an incredible panel, and now I'm so excited to build off this wonderful introduction you've given to this issue. Julio, I'm going to play, I want to play off and dive a little deeper into what Mariana was just saying about, this need to find the space for people actually to have time to engage when everything around them, just getting through their daily life day, is, in such stress. And, you've worked with East Palo Alto residents who were already reeling, for example, from the housing crisis, even before, COVID hit. That was a really critical thing. And with the twin health and economic threats that are now, on top of that. And I would imagine disproportionate access to broadband internet, which is now sort of the forced venue really for us to connect. How do you see meaningfully reaching out and hearing from people, creating a different way of touching them in a way that's still trustful and effective, when in fact the rules of almost disengagement under COVID, because we just can't be together in the same space? How are you managing that with your community?
Well, Krishna, I think one of the things that we do right here in Nuestra Casa is, like I say before, being in the community and being part of the community. So we, in the past, we had a food recovery program that we converted to a food distribution program. And instead of the community getting here to get the food, we go to the apartment buildings and distribute food. So that's the trust that you start building in the community. So I say, okay, we have different EJ projects that we're engaged in, but I say, well, let's balance this and let's see what is important right now for the community. Food and all this stuff is really important for the community. And that's the way that we engage with the community, because they see us as a provider for the community. They see us that we respond for the community. We don't wait like 6 months or 9 months to provide these services. We just jump into it. And how I'm grateful that I have a great executive director with me, because she rolls in what is important in the community. I mean, funding is important, but again, we move ahead without thinking in the funding. We think about the funding, after that. And like you say, at these times, it's like the people are thinking in paying the rent and just carrying all this burden with them. How can we engage and meaningful engage in the community? So the word meaningful is like thing is important for us to provide them with the access, especially internet access, and not being like one-time pool or something like that. It's like being right here in the community and having the needs. So it's like work with me. We provide the needs for the community, and the community engage with us in what we need and what we ask. And so it's building relationship. It's it's a part of that, and definitely I mean is. Especially in East Palo Alto, North Fair Oaks, and other areas, East Menlo Park, we have a big housing crisis. We still have them, because we have in the backyard Facebook, in the front yard Google, in the other backyard, all these companies that are here. So rent is really expensive right here. And to engage community in these important issues, we need to tie the stuff. Okay, we tie environmental justice and work with that, with housing justice, with all the air quality justice. So all that, it has to be tied down together, and talk to the community in a simple, and provide a simple message and hear what the community is saying. I think that's really important. So as right now, we're trying to move forward with Zoom meetings with the community, but how we want to engage them, how we want to provide them access and all that. That's questions that we need to be answering, and especially when it's difficult. So we don't have the answer yet, but as soon as we have, we will let people know. But I think for us as Nuestra Casa and the staff of Nuestra Casa are really committed to work with the community. So
yeah, it's the challenge of also working in communities where the inequities can be so apparent and so stark. As you just said, you're surrounded by Facebook and Google and Menlo Park, where literally across the street and within blocks, the level of wealth and access and opportunity is so different between communities, and that in and of itself is really hard. Mariana, I wanted to sort of ask you about that. Contra Costa as a county. And I think this is true of almost every county. So I'm not picking necessarily on Contra Costa, but because that's your base. There's been, extreme disparities in wealth and access. If you think about cities like Richmond or Antioch and their, everyday economic circumstances versus, say, Danville or Lafayette. How has the Ensuring Opportunity campaign incorporated equity at a ground level? And what does that look like in terms of changing who and how and where you show up in making decisions to tackle these inequities at their core?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I want to start by, for those who don't live in or work in or not familiar with Contra Costa, to say it's really interesting and an interesting example to think about how to create systems change and community engagement and leadership in a suburban county. So a lot of us have seen some great advocacy over the years in Alameda County, in San Francisco, certainly in San Mateo. Contra Costa is sort of in the more developmental stage, meaning there's not a long, strong, well-funded history of resident-led systems change and advocacy. And it's not for lack of need or lack of trying. It's simply been sort of shut down until recent years. The good news, in the last 10 years, there's been a tremendous development of leadership, of coalitions, of organizations. So there's really something special happening in Contra Costa. The other thing I want to say is that Contra Costa is really 3 counties. So there's West County, which is Richmond, San Pablo, other communities that are sort of more akin to Berkeley or Oakland, and that they do have a strong base of residents and organizations and funding. And then East County, which until recently was more agrarian and rural, is really quickly trying to catch up and still earlier in their development phases. And then South and Central County are more wealthy, they have more resources, less diverse, and not as even sort of plugged into awareness of needs. And of course, I'm speaking in generalities, but really that's kind of the quick landscape of the county. And so part of what Ensuring Opportunity does in our approach, and I think it's somewhat unusual, we work at both the grassroots and the grass tops, but because of the nature of our county, it's really important. So we are out at May Day rallies and at the Board of Supervisors and at all kinds of events and caravans to really speak truth to power about the needs and the inequities and disparities and injustices, and really name it clearly and be an allyship with our brothers and sisters who are struggling the most. And also, at the same time, we work with and at the sort of grass tops, system leaders, board of supervisors. So for example, Ensuring Opportunity's leadership team comprises the head of the health department for the county, the head of the social services department, First Five. And so we have very close working relationships with those very same system leaders that we sometimes go to board meetings and yell at. So it's sort of an interesting mix. And I think in this county, we are always on the side of equity and always will stand with those that are struggling the most. And we recognize that in order for systems to change, we must work with those that lead those systems, that inform those systems, and that fund those systems. And that means having those engagements and that kind of community engagement with those that hold the levers of power and hold the purse strings. A lot of what we do is trying to bridge those two, because it's not a healthy ecosystem to have Ensuring Opportunity be the sort of one of the few who could walk both sides of the street. So for example, with our Budget Justice Coalition, we have done over the last couple of years a number of Budget 101 workshops. The county budget is very complex, as those of you who have ever worked on one know. The budget itself is 600 pages. So we just really tried to humanize and decomplexify the county budget by holding our own workshops and also working with the county administrator. He actually did a workshop this year, his own 101 budget explanation in advance of the county budget hearing next week. So there's many, many ways we work in deep partnership and coalition across sectors, across systems, and always trying to elevate and lift up the voices, again, of those who are most impacted, because they are the ones, like that's the ultimate success model, that those most impacted with most wisdom and knowledge about what they truly need to thrive are truly at the center. So I think ensuring opportunity is almost a conduit or support to that ultimate model happening. But so far, I think it's working pretty well.
I just was having a mute problem there, but now I'm back. Melissa, Julio and Mariana both, I think, have given us incredibly rich examples of doing things differently, of listening first and engaging the community where they are and bringing their voices forward, of the grassroots versus grass tops and how to build the hierarchies of developing access at effective levels. But it's all really a lot, and we're constantly learning and changing how to engage better. And I know that you just recently released a new report, Farther Together, where Barzilai outlines 7 best practices that can synthesize a lot of these lessons learned, I think, in a framework, because I think one of the challenges for those of us in this space that want to help make things better, do things differently, be more authentic, it can be a bit overwhelming. And so frameworks are usually helpful. So I thought I'd love for you to share yours, and in particular, as folks, our listeners and others, really commit to doing things differently, what are the metrics of knowing that you're succeeding? How do you measure that change?
Yes, well, what struck me about what Mariana and Julio said is that, strong resilience planning and strong health planning are really the same thing. So about 2 years ago, in a conversation with Allison Brooks of the Bay Area Regional Collaborative, we were really talking about how do we merge health and resilience planning, because we know across the Bay Area region, the communities that get highlighted in sea level rise concerns, the communities that are highlighted in fire concerns, seismic concerns, there are really significant overlays with what we would call health equity communities, communities that are struggling with different living conditions that have put them at higher risk for a whole series of health concerns that ultimately show up in differences in quality of life, in both life expectancy and quality of life. And we know that good health planning and good resilience planning take care of what's happening right now, and then what's happening in the future, so that we can build stronger resilience for the future, like they're talking about. And so we worked with Mariana and Julio to think about the region as a whole in a different way to do resilience planning. And that different way to do planning was really about, and I'm going to tell you my 7 steps very quickly, but it was about the idea that across the region there are community organizations and different numbers, different depths and scale all across the region. And if we want to think about regional planning, we need to think about the different ways to engage when the groups are mostly volunteer versus when there's paid staff, and ways to have long-term sustainability for the organizations that are doing this very difficult work of continuing to build relationships and respond, as well as plan for the future. And so the first step, it sounds basic, but it's actually not something that usually happens, which is budget wisely for effective community engagement. We budget when we do planning for all kinds of soft costs. And when we build housing, we budget for all kinds of soft costs. But a lot of times the community engagement budget is not built into what we do. And so we both need to build in that budget, and we need to start to create pools of funds that make that available, not one-off and if there's enough money left in a project, but all the time and consistently, in a way that starts to create a base of resources for community groups to have ongoing support, to do the ongoing engagement we know it takes to really do things over time, as opposed to one-off, like they said earlier. The second is to really expand community engagement through interagency partnerships. And so Barzilai is the coalition of the Bay Area's public health departments, convened public health partners, the Bay Area Regional Collaborative and BCDC, the really convened partners who are thinking about resilience. And we took a look across the region of where there was strong community capacity interested in these issues, and where we knew life expectancy, health concerns, and climate impact concerns were all congregated. So we could do planning that considered both. And that really can build on what we know is moving in our region as a strategy, which is this real focus on equity. All across our region, governments have been engaged in governing for racial equity cohorts. All across our region, residents and voters are passing ballot initiatives to fund more housing. All across our region, we know that there are this whole series of things happening to promote an equity agenda, like the COVID-19 eviction moratoriums. And so expanding the interagency partnerships really helps do that process. And then the third part of the process is about co-designing our process with communities. So at the beginning, the community organizations, Julio, Mariana, others, sat and really designed what the engagement process would be. So it's not automatically just a set of meetings that are a standard set of required meetings. And that's really important for a lot of reasons. One, what Julio said is we build relationships when we show up for people when they need us, right? Around food, around other things. It's also important because there's a whole culture of meeting going, particularly in the government sector, that even the government employees don't necessarily enjoy. And so we want to have ways to engage that people care about and enjoy and really feel inspired to think about what the future of communities can be. And we want access for people who with a range of needs of access, right? I think some of the best community planning I did was in Boston, where when we were thinking about transportation, we were out at bus stops during rush hour to understand what people who we know definitely are using the bus have to say about what is needed next. And I think those kinds of engagements are really important. And then fourth, to make engagement activities accessible and relevant for all, like I just mentioned, the example of the bus work, and then identifying locally meaningful vulnerabilities and assets. So what is it that's making people's lives hard now? What are the flooding situations that are happening for people right now in heavy rain? And what do we do about those? What are their needs given how expensive our housing market has got, and what can we do right now? And then what are the assets we have to work on these things? Because there's a reason the Bay Area got the eviction moratoriums passed. There's a reason that we're seeing extended paid sick leave passed across counties. There is a really strong base of organized community groups who hear directly from community about what they need and know how to make that actionable in policy. And so really understanding those assets. And then the last two are to prioritize community-supported resilience actions. So when people tell us the priorities, believe them, and help find the ways to make that true. And to provide really a transparent, ongoing decision-making and follow-up. And we know we've done it right when we're continuing to be in conversation about needs that are evolving.
That's really awesome. And I realize now we have reached our target for Q&A. And so all of you have provided an incredibly rich background. We could have 2 to 3 hours on this subject, but why don't we, let me turn it back to Keenam, and let's get to some questions and answers, and then we can incorporate that into a wrap-up that will be too soon, I'm sure, for everyone engaged.
Got it. So yeah, just a reminder, if you want to participate in the Q&A, the easiest way to do that is to go to pollev.com/mtcabag302. And you can see you're able to both enter questions and then put a thumbs up or thumbs down on questions you'd like to see asked. Why don't we start with this top one, which is, what can be done to get technology and internet connections into the hands of those with less means, not just for public engagement, but also for distance learning?
That is a super important question. I think what I'll do, since I think we obviously have lots of them, I'll hand it over to one of you and then we can circle it around. Mariana, what about the work that you've done? What's your thoughts on this particular question?
I think that there's a number of layers here. In terms of simply accessing and providing resources, I think the solution lies in both the corporate sector as well as the, meaning AT&T and other technology companies, some of whom, including AT&T, I knew do provide services and access for lower income communities. So I want to credit what's already happening. And also the public sector in terms of ensuring that all residents, regardless of income, immigration status, etc., have access. I also know, as someone with a 6-year-old going into first grade, that at least my school has sent out surveys saying, do you have a tablet or computer? Do you have a phone? And they've committed to supporting students that don't have that access. I also want to say that that varies by district and by community, and it's again where inequities rear their head. I've talked with parents in lower resource communities where again that digital divide is widening because the schools or the districts, not for lack of intent, I would hope, but just simply lack of resources. And one could argue about allocation of resources and the need for reallocation, but it's also true that many districts in lower income communities have a lot less resources and not as active a PTA and et cetera. So I think the answer really lies with ultimately the communities, with all of us in allyship with those communities, demanding full access to equity and to the resources needed to have equitable access to education, and to work and to other fundamental needs of all human beings. And so how do we work together across sectors and really reimagine resource allocation and reimagine partnerships? So I do not have the magic answer on this. I just really have a lot of curiosity about how do we step into our greatness more fully and with complete commitment to those equitable outcomes. And I think once we ask each other that question, that's the first step. And then the other step is to, again, have residents at the center who are most in need of these resources, who don't currently have them, and say, what would work best for you?
You know, one of the things that's so interesting about the question and your incredibly thoughtful answer is picking up a couple of things that we were all talking about, how critical partnerships are going to have to be. But really also just how the needs that folks are facing can change so quickly. Right. I think back in April and March, in May, we were thinking, okay, we'll get through the end of school. Woo! And now everyone's having to tackle, oh my gosh, now it has to be remote, schooling again. And particularly for some of our students who are going to be impacted disproportionately by that forced environment in ways that, we didn't anticipate. So, the needs where they are just keep changing, and we need to deal with those. Kinam, what's the next question for our panel?
So next up, we have a bit of a horse race, but right now it's what feedback have you gotten from your clients about your current COVID public engagement activities? Which needs are still being unmet?
Julio, why don't you answer that question? Because again, you had been so articulate about the specific way that you had to change your critical food services for your community, given the challenges of not being able to, for example, have a food market again. What's been the feedback on your quick pivoting responses to community needs in Palo Alto?
Well, I think one of the issues that we have is probably, like I was talking before, like people own 3 or 4 months of rent, and I mean, this is we're gonna carry this over the next few months or few years. Loss of jobs in the service industry that's being really target the communities, especially the low-income immigrant and undocumented communities. Access of services also, language is really important, and a language that is really simple to explain. It's like a flyer about COVID-19. It has to be more simple. It has to be a simple explanation why when I'm needing to be used mask, and information sharing also, I think, has to be in a simple language the community will understand. But I think it's a lot of things that we're gonna be moving forward, and we need to rethink about it. But like Melissa said, we have good coalition right here with Barhai and other organizations that we can move forward and work in something like that. And just to jump in the question, before about the internet services, I thankful that AT&T and Comcast are providing services, but the issue is that it's only the basic services, and we need to improve into that one. If I pay $100 for access to the internet and I have like 400 MPs, I think my community has the right to do that, not only get the handouts from Comcast or AT&T. And that's something that kids who are living in apartments don't have access because they have very limited, and it's a time of the day that they get caught or they get really, if we suffer internet issues paying 100, 120, imagine all these kids that are going to be like with really limited internet connections. And technology, we see that technology is going to play a big role moving forward, and it's something that we need to be thinking and working into.
I think the one thing that we have absolutely gotten more attuned to, and we'll see what assistance comes from Washington, D.C. or Sacramento in this space, is infrastructure not just being housing and transportation, but this whole communications network that is, provides just a different layer of access and opportunity even before this crisis. But as I think many of you just said, in the crisis has just exposed how lack of, Julio, as you say, not only just access to the internet, but good, strong, reliable, access can really affect the future, particularly for our young folks. Kinam, next question.
Next up, the question is, you mentioned that people are very focused on short-term needs right now, rent, food. How do we get them to consider long-range planning on top of that? How to tie the local ... I think you get the gist of it.
Yeah. Melissa, do you want to tackle that question? Because this really is that challenge of, meeting people where they are and establishing relevance. And as planners, that is really hard sometimes to do, to be able to say that focus is meaningful now when there's so many challenges of short-term nature. What's been your experience and your suggestions there?
Yeah, I mean, the reason we're really focused right now on short-term needs is because we've lived in a Bay Area that has been so unequal, that people have really we're not able really to withstand challenges to our economic system or our housing because it's just been too expensive to hold on just on the best day. For most people. And so I think that the strategy about now is to address now and to get us out of that for the future so that we're building back to better than what we've had before. And so I think housing is the perfect example. People have been stressed on housing. There have been some really great moves over the last couple of years to make housing more fair. And so there's been a move to pass anti-rent gouging legislation statewide so that people's rent can't be suddenly just increased and people end up out on the street. That's one really good piece. That hasn't driven down the cost of housing, which is our next piece that really needs to happen. And for the places that people have been moving, because it's been more reasonable in Bay Area standards, we need to keep that reasonable and make sure it doesn't increase suddenly. We had that issue in Solano County where there was 2 big apartment buildings that were purchased. People were served with a notice of a doubling of their rent over a very brief period of time. And the community organizing in that community was able to go down to the city council and the mayor and get a cap put on how much you can suddenly increase someone's rent in a way that really mattered for people to be able to stay in their homes. Now, the more that we can start having long-range planning that makes everything more stable for families, the better we'll be able to do. And so we actually, Barhai, as the Coalition of the Health Departments, has prepared a regional COVID-19 response and rolling recovery plan. And that plan is focused on immediate response, like making sure people have housing now, food now, protection. So if they are, the primary protection we've been talking about in the region is people being able to stay home, but many, many people go to work every day as essential workers. And so making sure those essential workers have protection. And those are mostly Black and brown folks across the region, disproportionately so. And then the long-term strategy is, it shouldn't just be COVID-19 for which you have the ability to stay home for paid sick leave, right? That could be cancer, that could be a flu that we don't want to spread, right? Many, many things. And it shouldn't be just for COVID-19 that you're protected from homelessness in a high-cost housing market, right? And so we're working across the region to address now, and then to help people understand that this is an issue that's been caused by a long-term inequality in our society, and that we have the opportunity to build something better now. And I think that what COVID-19 has shown us is what people who have been doing emergency response have seen for a long time. So Sonoma County saw the disparities during the fires, and we see it in recovery, but the whole region doesn't feel it at the same time, right? What COVID-19 does is make sure the whole region sees it at the same time, the whole state. And I'm hoping what that will mean is that we mobilize in order to ensure that we get to an equity that allows us all to be much more safe and stable in the future.
Yeah, that's such a resonating message. And a couple of things are really important from what you all have said. One is, the responsibility of making the long-range view relevant rests with us and not with the folks who are basically trying to survive day to day. We need to make the message simple, to make it relevant, and to make it impactful. That bridge of, if we take the long-term view, it's because we want to build this stabilizing level for you now, and establish building blocks so things can improve going forward and not regress and go back to where they did before. So I think a lot of it is making it real time, even if it's a longer vision. And that's on all of us as professionals, particularly those of us going out. And I think, Mariana, you just said, if you're going to take people's time to come to a meeting and have a circle and have a discussion, you got to do a lot of homework ahead of time. And best part of that homework is talking with the community and knowing what their needs are first, and validating them and addressing them in those forums in some fashion. So that's definitely been something I've heard from all of you. I'm going to do a time check with the team. Do we have time for a few more questions?
Yeah, we have a little over 5 minutes left, so I'll try to weave together a couple of these questions. One of them is about what organizations with English-speaking staff can do to better communicate with non-native English speakers. So the kind of linguistic and cultural divide there. And then a couple more questions about the technological divide. You see this question of, how do you embrace digital engagement and reach more people when people don't have reliable access? I want to invoke the Plan Bay Area strategies that we've been doing this summer, doing telephone town halls in different languages. I don't know if there's text or other linguistic tools that you all have used. That question is coming up a lot in our circles.
Yeah, I would like maybe each one of you to speak to resources that folks could tap into, or where they could look. I think particularly given the fact that we need to address the language, I don't want to even call them challenges, because I think those languages need to be respected and we need to bring those in. But where do people go? Because I know often that is something that folks aren't well equipped to deal with effectively. So Julio, do you want to start with you? And then Mariana, and then Melissa.
Sure. I think, Melissa was talking about the Bar High and the partnership that we formed, but, it took quite a few months of conversations between all the organizations, and, we come to an understanding. But for language access, I think we need to partner with local organizations and build the capacity of these local organizations. We, Nuestra Casa, until like about 3 years ago, we were not working in the environmental justice field, but, different partners came in, and Barhai came to the table and say, okay, let's talk about this, let's exercise this one. And then BCDC came to the table, and we had the same conversations. They help us to educate the organizations with, it wasn't a capacity building for local organizations is really important. We know the language, we know the community, we know how to access the community. I mean, we have a big Pacific Islander community, and I hire people to work they're Pacific Islanders. We have, English speaking and African American community, and we have facilitators who are African American. We cannot do all the work, but we are the experts right here in the community. So, just partnering with local community organizations and build their capacity. I think that's really, really important. And, where Barhai came to the table and start talking about this and start building the capacity on Nuestra Casa and moving forward, I think that's a really important step. It's not like, when they say that, sometimes we go for grants and we want to try to meet the outcomes of grants, but I think we need to meet before the outcomes of communities. And I think that's really important, to sitting on the table, don't have any expectations, and start building from there.
Mariana, do you have anything to add to that? Because I do believe the resources are at hand and they're in the community themselves. How have you connected in that way? Do you have some other thoughts on that?
I do. I really want to support and echo what Julio just said so eloquently about partnerships, and I'll get to that in a minute. I want to start by saying that actually I think the work around this starts inside. So what am I personally doing to dismantle white supremacy? What am I doing to learn about other cultures? And I'm on that journey every day, and I'm not perfect at it. It's the absolute critical moral responsibility, especially for white folks, to do that work. I think then the staff that we have around us, ensuring opportunity is a mighty team of two. My colleague Hector is Spanish-speaking, bilingual, bicultural. It was a very critical component of his hiring, and he's been a beautiful connector to communities that I'm not quite able to connect with as deeply as he can because of language, right? And so making sure that whether you're a huge public agency or a small business or a school or a community-based organization, that all of us are collectively comprising and looking like and sounding like and culturally connected with our communities, our diverse communities. That's the second thing. And then I think for small organizations like mine, I think that gets to the partnership piece that Julio referred to, because we don't have a staff of 20 to reflect all communities. I wish I did. So it's really important for us to connect with very, very trusted residents, resident leaders, the organizations that work with them and serve them, who really have those cultural access and trust and understanding, who can help to educate me to be the best ally and support possible. And also just at a practical level, hey, I can translate this document into Punjabi. So how can we all together pool our resources? That is the beauty of partnership, that I don't have to have a staff of 20. I just need to have good friendships and collegiality, and how can we help each other? The last thing I want to say about the tech divide, I both believe, as I said before, that folks should have access to technology regardless of any criteria. Just every human in our community must have access. And I really want to make a case for high touch and not to overly rely on high tech. I think here in the Bay Area, the home of Google, et cetera, it's like, let's get an app for that. And I just am like, let's not. And so as an example, out in East County, Ensuring Opportunity is housed at the Richmond Community Foundation. They have this beautiful initiative called Mobility Labs, where we're looking at how to elevate and lift up economically the lives of folks in East County who, as I said, have been long neglected. And so when COVID hit, we really had to pivot. And so we just really pivoted. And instead of doing sort of big coalition meetings and things like that were very planful, we actually just hired a couple of community organizers who could go out into the community just through texting and very creative ways to be socially distanced and safe, to ask folks, what do you need right now? And so the way that we're actually building trust and building economic, building toward that longer term plan, as we were just talking about, is to really pivot and respond to immediate needs. And that is not a fancy app. It's literally two people on their couches with phones, texting with people, and a little bit of social media, and boom, you're done. And it's been incredibly effective, and thousands of dollars have gotten out in that community in the space of 4 weeks for these incredible women leading that work, who really understand and connect with that community far better than a county agency or even me could ever do, right? So that's the asset-based approach, and just, you know, not doing too much, not losing the focus on humans connecting with humans.
And on that, I'll give the last word to Melissa. Do you know, is there hope for the true community circle and looking us forward? What do you see?
I think so, because what I hear Julio and Mariana saying is that there's a difference between translation and connection, and that what we do is hire community organizations and community groups that are deeply rooted in community, that people who work in the organization both speak the language and are part of the culture, part of the neighborhood, and can reach out to their networks and understand what's important to people. And I think that that is the huge asset of the Bay Area. And I think, you know, really building, like Julio said, the capacity of organizations to do that over time, to have these standing funding streams that fund community engagement and don't ask them to do it for free, so that we can have more and more members of different communities on staff able to provide those services and connections to community is really important. And so I love that, you know, in particular, Mariana and Julio and so many of the other partners we work with really understand that it's both the language and the relationship and connection. And the more that we can help public systems have more of that on staff, and for community groups to have the resources they need to maintain staff at levels that can afford to be in the Bay Area, it can be a really powerful strategy for both the short and long term.
Well, you know, I am so sorry that we have to close this session, because again, I have found it incredibly inspiring and educational. And I thank all of you for your time and your expertise and your spirit. We need more of this. I hope that this has both inspired and educated all of our participants today. I'll turn it back over to Keenan to wrap us up. But again, incredible thanks to all of you.
Hey, thanks for joining us for today's Metro Talk. Big thank you to our panelists and Therese for moderating this thoughtful and thought-provoking session. A recording of this session will be on MTC's YouTube and Facebook pages, so please smash that like button and subscribe to our pages to access the latest. And we invite you to complete a little survey linked below, letting us know how we can improve Metro Talks and also to make suggestions for future topics. And with that, big wave goodbye, and thank you, everybody.